It was the summer of 1996 when 4 high school friends, 2 boys and 2 girls, planned what was supposed to be a simple weekend camping trip in the Great Smoky Mountains. They had just finished their junior year and wanted one last adventure before the responsibilities of adulthood started closing in. Armed with backpacks, sleeping bags, and a sense of thrill, they set off down one of the lesser-known trails. The sun was bright, the woods alive with the chirping of cicadas, and their laughter echoed through the trees. None of them could have imagined this would be the last time anyone would see them alive. By Sunday evening, when they were supposed to return home, their parents grew uneasy. At first, the families assumed the teens had simply lost track of time, maybe lingering by a river or exploring a cave. But when night fell and the forest remained silent, the unease turned into panic. Calls were made, rangers were alerted, and within hours, a search team was dispatched to the Smokies. What they found would only deepen the mystery. The teens' campsite was discovered tucked away beneath a cluster of trees. Their tent stood half-zipped. Inside were sleeping bags and personal belongings, as if they had left in the middle of the night. A campfire still smoldered, its dying embers glowing faintly in the dark, as though abandoned in haste. Food remained unpacked, some of it half-eaten, as if they had been interrupted mid-meal. There were no signs of a struggle, no footprints leading away, only the heavy, suffocating silence of the woods. Rescuers noted something even stranger. The teens had carefully logged their hike in a small map book, marking their route with neat pencil strokes. The trail notes ended at their campsite, with no indication of venturing further. It was as if they had simply walked out into the night and vanished into thin air. Some rangers suggested they may have gotten lost or wandered off, but the absence of tracks raised an unsettling question. How could 4 people disappear without leaving a single trace? Back in town, rumors began to swirl. Parents whispered that the teens had run away, though their belongings told a different story. Locals, however, had a darker explanation. They spoke of the Smokies as a place that swallowed the careless, of whispers that lured travelers deeper into the woods, never to return. As the search intensified, those whispers began to feel less like stories and more like warnings. When rangers combed through the campsite, one of the most chilling discoveries wasn't the abandoned gear or the smoldering fire. It was a small, water-damaged journal. The notebook belonged to one of the boys, a 17-year-old who had been known among friends for jotting down thoughts and sketching maps of his surroundings. Its pages were warped from moisture, the ink blurred in places, but enough writing was still legible to piece together fragments of the teens' final days. What the entries revealed hinted at something far stranger than a simple case of lost hikers. The early pages were innocent enough. Notes about setting up camp, jokes about running out of snacks, and quick sketches of the mountains and trees. But as the entries progressed, the tone shifted. A line written hastily across a wrinkled page read, "We keep hearing it at night. Not an animal. Not the wind. Something else." Another entry scribbled just hours before their disappearance was even more unsettling. "It's calling our names. Same voice. Sounds like us." The handwriting grew shaky, as if written in a rush, as though the boy wanted to record what was happening before it was too late. What made the journal especially disturbing was one sentence underlined twice in heavy pencil strokes. "Don't follow the sound." There was no further explanation, no context, just those 4 words, etched into the page like a desperate warning. Investigators couldn't decide if it was paranoia, a prank among friends, or a genuine plea for safety. Yet, paired with their unexplained disappearance. The entry carried an eerie weight that left even seasoned rangers unsettled. The handwriting in the final entry trailed off mid-sentence, with the last legible words being, "It's closer tonight. I think it's right outside." The sentence stopped abruptly, as though the writer had been interrupted. The pen dragged across the page, leaving a long black smear. That smear became the last recorded sign of the teens before they vanished. To this day, no one knows what forced him to stop writing, or if whatever was outside the tent that night was the same force that led to their disappearance. For investigators, the journal became more than just a piece of evidence. It was a breadcrumb, a fragment of their last hours that hinted at something unnatural lurking in the Smokies. Parents clutched the copies of those words as if they might reveal the truth. Rangers, however, quietly admitted that they had never seen a missing persons account so cryptic, so unnervingly direct. And while the journal provided clues, it offered no answers, only a darker mystery that deepened with every turn of the page. Long before the teens vanished, the people living around the Great Smoky Mountains had whispered warnings about that stretch of forest to outsiders. The tales sounded like nothing more than campfire folklore. Stories meant to spook children and keep tourists from wandering too far. But for those who had grown up in the shadow of the Smokies, the warnings carried a different weight. They spoke of something ancient that lived in the valleys, a presence that didn't just watch travelers, but called out to them in familiar voices, leading them astray. Some locals recalled hearing the forest mimic loved ones in uncanny ways. Hunters reported being miles from home when they swore they heard their wives, or children calling their names from the trees. When they followed the voices, they often found themselves lost, standing in places they didn't recognize. One man, a veteran tracker, admitted he refused to enter certain trails alone. He claimed he once heard his own voice echo back at him from the woods, repeating words he had spoken only moments earlier. Stories of disappearances had long haunted the region. Families could recite lists of names, hikers, campers, even seasoned mountain folk, who had entered the Smokies and never returned. What tied many of these tales together was the same strange detail. Before vanishing, those people had complained of hearing laughter, whispers, or voices that didn't belong. Some insisted that the voices were a trick of the wind, or echoes bouncing through the ridges. Others believed the woods themselves were alive, feeding on anyone foolish enough to listen. By the time the 4 teens went missing, the locals weren't surprised. To them, the tragedy wasn't a mystery, but a grim confirmation of what they already feared. They warned search parties not to go too deep at night, not to follow any sound that seemed out of place. One elderly woman even told reporters, "The forest doesn't take them all at once. It calls them, one by one, until none are left." Her words were dismissed as superstition, but her face, pale and trembling, told another story. Despite the warnings, authorities pressed on, dismissing folklore as irrelevant to the case. Yet, for the families of the missing teens, the locals' voices lingered in their minds. Could it be possible that their children had heard something that wasn't real? Or worse, something that was real, but not human? The deeper the investigation went, the harder it became to separate rumor from evidence, legend from fact. And as the days passed, the Smokies grew quieter, as though the forest itself was listening. The morning after the teens were reported missing, search teams were assembled with urgency. Dozens of rangers, volunteers, and trained dogs were brought into the Smokies, combing the dense undergrowth with flashlights and radios, crackling in the misty air. Helicopters circled overhead, their spotlights sweeping across the treetops. On the ground, the air was thick with tension. Everyone expected to find at least a trail. Footprints, broken branches, discarded items, but the forest offered nothing. It was as if the teens had been swallowed whole by the wilderness. The dogs initially picked up a scent near the abandoned campsite. Noses pressed low against the ground as they led searchers along a winding path through the woods. The handlers followed with growing hope. For nearly half a mile, the trail was steady, the dogs straining at their leashes, pulling the group deeper into the forest. But then, without warning, they stopped. Their ears flattened, their tails lowered, and one of the animals whimpered before refusing to move forward. At the edge of a steep ravine, the trail abruptly ended, as though the teens' scent had simply dissolved into thin air. Rescuers lowered themselves cautiously into the ravine, searching for signs of a fall. They scanned every ledge, every crevice, every patch of soil. Nothing. No scraps of clothing, no broken branches, no bodies at the bottom. The absence of evidence was almost worse than a grim discovery. It gave the families no closure, only more questions. How could 4 teenagers vanish along a single trail without leaving behind even a single track? The searchers began to whisper among themselves, uneasy at the thought that the locals' warnings might hold more truth than they cared to admit. For 2 relentless weeks, the Smokies echoed with shouts of the teens' names, with search teams sweeping miles of wilderness by foot and helicopter. Camps were set up to keep the effort alive, and each night, rescuers gathered around their fires with heavy hearts, exchanging stories of strange noises and fleeting shadows. Some reported hearing laughter deep in the woods, though no one was there. Others swore they saw movement at the edge of their lantern light, only for it to vanish when approached. These accounts were never written in official reports, but among the searchers, they were remembered. Eventually, the operation began to lose momentum. After days with no trace and resources running thin, the massive search was scaled back. Families pleaded for it to continue, but authorities insisted that the chances of survival after so long were slim. The forest seemed to grow darker with each passing day, and the air itself felt heavier, as though it resented the intrusion. The ravine where the dogs had stopped became a place of grim significance, a boundary line no one could explain. And though the official search ended, the mystery of the vanished teens had only just begun. A decade passed before the Smokies gave up even the faintest trace of the missing teens. By then, their case had become little more than a tragic memory, a story passed around in whispers, half legend and half truth. But in the summer of 2006, 2 hikers exploring a remote section of the mountains stumbled across something strange. Wedged inside the mouth of a narrow cave, almost hidden beneath layers of leaves and rock, they found what looked like scraps of old fabric. When they pulled the fragments free, they realized it was not just fabric. It was clothing, torn and faded, the colors nearly erased by time. Beside the cloth lay a rusted flashlight, its casing eaten away by years of dampness, but still recognizable. The hikers, unsettled by the discovery, snapped a few photos before leaving the cave. They turned the items over to authorities, who immediately noticed an eerie detail. The flashlight was the exact same model one of the missing boys had been carrying in 1996. To the families, the objects were more than just debris. They were a painful reminder that somewhere out in those woods, their children's final steps might have been recorded in silence. When investigators returned to the cave days later, they expected to find more evidence, bones, belongings, or perhaps even signs of shelter. But the cave was empty. The scraps of fabric and the flashlight were gone, as though they had never been there. The hikers swore they hadn't imagined it. They had photographs, time-stamped and clear, showing the exact items they had discovered. Yet standing in the damp darkness of the cave, investigators found nothing but bare stone and silence. The disappearance of the evidence deepened the mystery. Some believed scavengers or other hikers had taken the items. Others whispered something darker. That whatever had taken the teens was ensuring no one got too close to the truth. The idea unsettled even the most practical investigators. How could objects that had survived 10 years vanish in just a matter of days, right after being reported? It was as if the woods had changed its mind about what it was willing to reveal. The families clung to the photographs as the only proof that their children had left behind anything at all. For them, the images were both a lifeline and a torment. Evidence that their children had been there, but also a reminder of how close they had come to answers that slipped away yet again. The Smokies, it seemed, were not finished guarding their secret. And the more time passed, the stronger the feeling grew that the forest itself was choosing what to show and what to hide. In the years that followed, the story of the vanished teens became more than just a cold case. It grew into an obsession for true crime enthusiasts, paranormal researchers, and even amateur explorers. Online forums dedicated entire threads to dissecting the timeline, the journal entries, and the mysterious cave discovery. Some treated it as an unsolved crime. Others were convinced it was something far beyond human explanation. By the late 2010s, groups of investigators began traveling to the Smokies, determined to retrace the teens' final steps and uncover what really happened on that fateful weekend. Armed with technology far more advanced than what search parties had in 1996, these investigators came prepared. They brought drones capable of scanning the forest canopy, night vision cameras to pierce the darkness, and thermal imaging devices to detect the slightest hint of movement. Many of them followed the exact trail the teens had taken, camping at the same spot where the abandoned tent had been found. By day, their recordings showed nothing unusual, just birdsong, rustling leaves, and the quiet rush of distant streams. But by night, the forest told a different story. On the second night, a team sitting by their fire reported hearing faint echoes drifting through the trees. At first, it sounded like laughter. Soft, almost playful, but carrying too far to be natural. They replayed their audio recorders again and again, certain they had captured something more than coincidence. The sound wasn't animal, wasn't wind, and most chillingly, wasn't random. When slowed down and analyzed, the laughter carried a distinct human cadence, eerily similar to one of the missing boys, whose voice had been preserved in home videos years earlier. The investigators pushed further on the third night, determined to follow the sound. Their thermal cameras flickered with brief anomalies, shapes darting between trees, too quick to classify. Some swore they saw figures standing at the edge of the firelight, only to vanish when approached. Others insisted the forest seemed to grow denser the deeper they went, as if it were closing around them. Every piece of equipment captured something unusual, but nothing clear enough to explain. It was as if the forest allowed only fragments to be seen, never the whole truth. Their trail ended exactly where the original search party had stopped the ravine. Standing at its edge, the present-day investigators felt the same chilling halt the dogs had once shown. It was here, as cameras rolled and audio equipment buzzed, that they stumbled upon something no one could ignore. An old tree standing at the edge of the drop, its bark freshly carved with words that hadn't been there before. Still here. Don't follow the sound. The message carved into the bark stopped the group in their tracks. The letters were jagged, uneven, as if scratched in haste, but what unsettled them most was how fresh the cuts looked. The wood was pale where it had been stripped away, untouched by time or weather. Whoever, or whatever, had left it had done so recently, perhaps only days or hours before the investigators arrived. The words were identical to the journal entry from 1996. Don't follow the sound. It was as if the warning had traveled through time, resurfacing to remind anyone brave, or foolish, enough to return. The team circled the tree in disbelief, filming from every angle, their voices hushed despite the adrenaline coursing through them. Questions flooded their minds. Had someone discovered the teens' journal and copied the words as a cruel joke? Or was it possible that the teens themselves had been here, leaving behind a final desperate warning long after everyone believed them gone? The investigators couldn't agree. What they did agree on, however, was the heavy feeling that pressed down on them, as if the forest itself was waiting for their next move. That night, camped not far from the ravine, they struggled to sleep. Every creak of the branches overhead felt amplified. Every gust of wind seemed to carry a whisper. One of the cameras, left running on a tripod, recorded something that chilled them further. Around 2 a.m., the faint sound of footsteps approached the tree line near camp. The crunch of leaves was clear, deliberate, yet when flashlights swept the woods, nothing was there. The recording ended with a long, low laugh that faded into silence. By morning, the investigators returned to the tree to examine the carving again. This time, they noticed something they had missed in the darkness. Below the original words, faint but visible, were smaller scratches. They weren't clean letters, more like hurried lines. But when studied closely, they seemed to form the beginnings of another phrase, as if someone had started writing and stopped midway. The half-formed letters looked almost like the start of a name. Whose name? They couldn't tell. The incomplete message deepened the unease. It felt like a conversation cut short, interrupted by something unseen. Standing at the ravine's edge once more, they debated whether to climb down and search the depths. The warning carved into the tree loomed in their minds, the words echoing the journal that had sparked decades of questions. Some argued they were closer to answers than ever before. Others believed pressing further would mean repeating the same fate as the teens in 1996. And as the debate lingered in the heavy morning air, the forest around them grew still. Unnaturally still. Like it was listening to their every word. Some mysteries are never meant to be solved. The Smokies have swallowed countless stories, but this one lingers. Half truth, half warning. Were those teens victims of the wilderness, of something human, or of something far older that waits in the shadows of the trees? No one can say for certain. What we do know is this. The journal's words still echo, the laughter still drifts on the wind, and fresh warnings keep appearing as if the forest itself refuses to let the story die. And perhaps even now, somewhere deep in the Smokies, the voices are still calling.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.